All right, so we're going to get started. So we appreciate you showing up for this webinar this afternoon. This is the third webinar that we've done since we've moved to our new virtual world. And I want to welcome everyone and thank you for taking the time to join us. We're going to spend about 20 minutes presenting to you, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Yeah, these are unique circumstances that we're facing with the coronavirus, and it's really turned the world upside down. Um, and this seemed like the perfect time to talk about a subject that we've been actually teaching and working through with clients for the past several years, which is resilience. And so this afternoon, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about this idea about building the capacity to adapt in turbulent times. And so by way of introduction, if you don't know me, I'm Brian Formato. I'm the founder of Groove Management, a human capital consulting firm. I also run a program called LeaderSurf, which is an experiential leadership development program that, among other things, teaches business leaders how to surf. And we use surfing as a metaphor for pushing out of your comfort zone, being vulnerable, and becoming more resilient. And so the work that we're going to talk about this afternoon is actually covered in the LeaderSurf program, in that believe that to be an effective leader, you have to build resilience. And we'll talk more about that. Before I do that, let me introduce Adam, or have him introduce himself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Adam. I'm a senior consultant. I've been working with Groove Management for about a year, but before that, for 15 years, I was in HR leadership in a variety of organizations and managing that function through exciting and turbulent times, such as the recession and other industry ups and downs. I've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, maybe helping employees through times when they need to be resilient.
Cool. So, I think this is one of those great memes that's been all over the internet from time to time, but it's this idea that attitude is everything, and that you have to have a can-do attitude in order to push through any adversity. And given everything that's going on in the world and the uncertainty ahead of us, one of the things that I think is important is to step back a little bit and recognize that while these are uncharted times and there's a lot going on, the fact that we are home, the fact that we are potentially spending more time with our family during this, there's certain things that the coronavirus has afforded us in terms of hitting pause on the busy lives that we lead and potentially having a little bit more time to reflect. But just this idea of having a can-do attitude is really important to push through adversity. So usually when we do this workshop, we do it interactively and in person. And one of the first activities that we often like to do, and we're going to ask you to do this for the next 30 seconds or so, is to think about the largest obstacle that you've ever overcome in your life. Whether it was the loss of a relative or loved one, whether it was the loss of a job, whether it was having to deal with a physical or health issue of your own. There's lots of things that come to mind for me and hopefully for each of you. But what I'd like you to do is just take a second to come up with one thing that you think is the largest obstacle that you've ever overcome. All right, hopefully you've got something in your mind. Now what I'd like you to think about is, was that obstacle something that was self-imposed, meaning I put an obstacle in my own path saying that, hey, I'm going to learn a second language, or I'm going to pick up and move to the other side of the country or to another country, or to do something that pushes me out of my comfort zone. I'm going to run a marathon. Or was the obstacle something that was imposed upon you? My guess is that in the majority of cases, that obstacle that you came up with was something that was imposed upon you. You didn't ask for it, you didn't choose it, it was put there. And guess what? You're here today, which means that you found a way to overcome it. And so we all have the capacity to be resilient. We've all overcome obstacles. And more often than not, the things that push us out of our comfort zone and where we learn the most are those things that are thrust upon us. Similar to the situation we're in now. Nobody asked for the coronavirus to upset our world, but we're living through it right now. I keep saying it's a fascinating movie. The only problem is we're all in it.
Yeah, this is not a great movie, but on our website, you can go and check out a little movie about this really cool football club from Koh Phangan in Thailand. So Koh Phangan is a fishing village, and you can see it on the upper left there. And that's what it looks like. There's no landmass whatsoever. Now, imagine if you're a group of kids there and you love soccer or football, as they call it, and you want to learn to play the sport, but you literally don't have land that you can play on. You can see where this is going on the bottom. These kids scrap together a dock and dedication. But you can see up in the top, eventually they've got uniforms, and that's because practicing on this little dock over the years, getting wet when the ball went in the water, and then getting back up on this wooden football field. They practiced so hard that they made it to the tournament on the mainland. And then when they competed on the mainland, what they found was the resilience that they developed through practicing in this makeshift field actually made them really good players, because playing on a smaller field with smaller goals, with nails in the in the ground, and with wet boards made them much more agile and nimble, and they did very well in the tournament. They didn't win in the first round, but they came in second. And if you want to watch the whole video, we have that up on the website. But it's a great example of resilience. So, training is important, and overcoming adversity is really the cornerstone to defining resilience, because without having a challenge and without having something that you do have to overcome, you're never going to get the experience and the training that you need to be stronger for the challenges that come down the road. So the first thing that we have to recognize is that resistance to change is normal, but also in this situation that we're all dealing with today, as Brian said, nobody asked for this, and this is frustrating at the least and catastrophically bad at the worst. And being resistant to it and not wanting to deal with something as significant as this in the environment and our social environment and our organizations, it's normal. It's totally normal to just initially have a knee-jerk reaction of frustration and resistance. But what we need to do is adapt to that. So the key to overcoming adversity and becoming resilient is adapting to the situation. So, we're in control of our reactions. So obviously everyone's going to resist it and everybody's going to be frustrated. But then once you sort of accept the circumstances as changing and dynamic and frustrating as they might be, and start to think about how you can overcome it and maybe even use it to your advantage, that's the key to survival. If you go on Instagram or on LinkedIn and you see people with all these really wonderful posts about success and their accomplishments and people being promoted and taking on new responsibilities and buying new companies, and you see all these really cool things, it's really just the highlight reel. And if you ask any of these folks, or if you've seen any interviews with successful people or celebrities or famous sports players, they'll tell you that the road to success is not a straight line. And that is the foundation for us developing resilience, is dealing with all these roadblocks and failures, challenges, and frustrations. And this is obviously what we're dealing with right now, is a huge one. And every day it brings with it new challenges and new frustrations. But the ability for us to adapt to these things will make us stronger in the long run. So in the same vein as earlier, when we thought about, some of the obstacles that we've overcome in life, take another minute, not a whole minute, but take a few more seconds and think about the most resilient person that you know. When you think of somebody who's resilient, it may be a famous person, it might be a family member, but what makes that person resilient? Why do you admire them? What adversities did they face? Were they things that they put in front of themselves, like Brian mentioned, or are they things that were thrust upon them from an environmental source and they figured out a way around it? And how did they overcome it? I'll give you a personal example. I know a guy named Eric Strong, and I'm a big runner, so I run a lot. And a few years ago, I was I went to one of my running groups, and we had a strange guy there that I'd never seen before. He didn't look like he was in any kind of particular running shape, and he was endorsed by the running store to talk to the rest of us about something. So I was intrigued, so I started listening. And he was a native New Yorker, and he was down here in Charlotte. And what he was talking about was this running group that he had in New York City, where the blind and other folks that had different disabilities were partnered up with able-bodied and sighted runners to start running if they wanted to. And so this guy Julius, through this program, he ended up climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. He had run marathons, all sorts of things. But he wanted to bring that chapter, a chapter of Achilles International is the name of the organization, down here to Charlotte. So I talked to him afterward. I said, well, how do you even do this? And what can we do to try to get things going down here? And to make a long story short, he and I went around to all these different blind organizations and running organizations, and we just tried to find people that were interested in participating and pair them up. Through this, I met this guy named Eric. And when we met Eric, you know, he had a degenerative eye disease, which means that he basically was not born blind. He was actually a really strong athlete through his youth and into high school. But in his late teens and early 20s, he lost his vision. And as you might imagine, that was devastating. You know, so when I met him, he was in his late 20s and he hadn't exercised in years. So Julius and I convinced him to come out and give it a shot. And slowly but surely, we started running together. And eventually, within the span of a year, he actually ended up becoming so much more able than me. You know, he was faster runner, and I had to start finding other people to run with him so that he could continue his training far beyond what I was capable of. And I mentioned to Brian, you know, this was 2 or 3 years ago. And last year, he kept up with it to the point where he's now run an ultra marathon. And I think he had a team of helpers. Now, I don't know that everybody who ran with him ran 100 miles, but he had a whole caravan of folks that supported him. So he went from, you know, forget about couch to 5K. This guy went from couch to 100-mile race.
Yeah, amazing. I love that story. So I think we all probably have, you know, people that come to mind that are an inspiration based on the resilience that they built and the adversity that they overcame. And I think that's the key to this, is that in more cases than not, yeah, there was an ailment, there was a challenge, there was a hurdle. It wasn't something they placed in front of them, but they found a way to power through. So, you know, when you start thinking about this concept, resilience really has to start in our minds. And it's this, yeah, the little engine that could, I think I can, I know I can kind of mentality. We have to believe in ourselves first in order to then be able to make that reality. And so there's this whole power of, you know, cognitive therapy or of positivity. And my daughter always talks about these videos she watches around the law of attraction and this idea about if you believe in it, you can will it to be. And I think there's a lot to having that positive mindset. The other piece, and we do a lot of work at Groove Management around this, is the power of self-awareness. I believe that when you look at leadership and the characteristics of the most successful and capable leaders, the one defining feature for the best leaders is that they're self-aware. They know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, and they've learned how to play to their strengths. Now, when it comes to dealing with, you know, adversity and building resilience, I think it's really important that we reflect on who we are, what we've been through in our lives, those experiences, what's gotten us down in the past, and given us the hope that, hey, we've had hardship before, we're going to have hardship again, and we've powered through, and we can power through whatever is put in front of us. And that idea of really self-reflection, thinking about yourself, thinking about how you deal with adversity and how you've powered through in the past, I think is an important characteristic that we see in resilient people. The other one is this idea about obstacles. Right? And viewing that obstacle not as unsurmountable, not as something that we can't get through, but instead as a challenge that is one for us to overcome, right? Obstacles as challenges, not immovable objects. And therefore, we kind of take a different view on them and we say, we're up for this challenge. We know that it's going to make us stronger. We know that it's not permanent and that there's going to be ways around it. I mentioned the Leader Surf program and teaching executives to surf, and here you see a picture of an advertising executive basically doing a face plant, wiping out in the water. And I love this image because, yeah, it's such a graceful fall. We teach people how to fail in the program, and one of the things that we harp on is the fact that when you fall, you should fall like a starfish rather than diving. In this way, you don't dive deep. And so there is a right way and a wrong way to fail. And so resilient people, they learn how to fail. They embrace failure as learning, and they recognize that this is the way that we grow, is through our failures. And if you look at your own career trajectory and you look at your own lives, chances are the things that have powered you through to the successes you've had have been those missteps, those failures, those job losses, those missed promotions, etc. All those things build the character of who we are. And so we do learn through our failures, and we have to recognize that.
Yeah, and unlike this noble squirrel, we have to maintain focus. So things are going to come up, things are going to happen. We're going to fail at things, and we're going to learn a lot along the way. But at the end of the day, we have to always keep our eye on the prize and know where we want to be going, how in the direction that we want to be headed in. Part of being able to do that is having the flexibility to adapt to the environment and transform. So if you keep your eye on the prize and you know where you're going, no matter what life throws at you, you'll figure out a way to get around it because you're going to be adapting to keep progressing on that path. Another characteristic of resilience, especially within leaders, is having high emotional intelligence. Being able to balance, what you want and what you need to do, and also having empathy. And that's, being maybe a little bit more considerate of others and understanding that, especially right now, we're all in the same situation and we all have stressors, and just being a little bit more understanding with your employees, your customers, and everyone in general. So one of the things that you hear about with resilience that's been studied time and time again is that resilient people have really strong social bonds. And that's something that we really need to leverage and double down on right now. So social distancing is obviously a huge thing that we're all practicing. That's why we're doing this on a webinar instead of our usual format of in person. But what's now a challenge for everybody with the working from home is that you need to still maintain those social bonds as best as you can, right? It's relying on others and working together that make us great. So, doing video chats, having more often regular meetings with your team, audio calls if that's what it takes, but just maintaining those relationships and continuing to try to cultivate them during this time.
Yeah. One thing that I'll add to that is that what I've found is that there's many people that I have not been in contact with for a very long time that all of a sudden, given, this being, stuck at home, that I've actually reached out or have been reached out to by people that I hadn't been in touch with for a long time. And it's kind of nice to reconnect and to share, so what's going on in your city and how are you and your family dealing with the adversity that we're facing. Likewise, I mean, honestly, Adam and I work together a lot, but since this started, we've had more interactions through Zoom than we have physical interactions when we can meet together. And so there are ways that this actually has brought people closer together, not pushed them further apart. When we do our workshops with companies and in the executive coaching work that I do, one of the things that is really true that I've found around the whole topic of resilience is that an organization ultimately is only as resilient as the people who run it, right? And so if the leaders in an organization are showing fear, uncertainty, and they don't know what to do, that becomes obvious and can become negatively contagious to the organization. On the flip side, if the leaders come out posturing for success and say, we're going to make it through this, we're going to make it through this together, realistically, we don't know what we're going to look like coming out of this, but at the same time, they have faith, that too can be contagious in a very positive way. And so if an organization is filled with leaders that show positivity and that they're resilient, then the organization will be resilient. And so if you're in a leadership role, I think it's really critical right now to step up to the challenge, A crisis is the ultimate opportunity for leaders to show their leadership ability. So I'd like to bring in to focus here is a tool that we've been using. When you think about resilience, did you know that it's actually something that can be measured, taught, learned, and improved? A lot of people think, oh, well, resilience is innate, and it's something that just happens because you're thrust into a bad situation and you made the best of it. Truth of the matter is that it is actually a learned skill and one that you can improve at through focus and through hard work. And so Korn Ferry has an online survey called the Resilience Factor Inventory. And we've been using this in a number of programs, and it's a really powerful tool for people to get insights into their own aptitude and capacity as it relates to resilience. And so what I wanted to walk you through is kind of high level what this inventory does. So there's 7 factors of personal resilience, and these are the 7 factors. And so the tool, through asking these questions, really they position you in terms of how what your aptitude is around each of these 7 factors. So the first one is around emotional regulation. It's this idea of, do you wear your emotions on your sleeve, or are you able to keep them in check, right? And how does that show up in your daily life? Your impulse control. So are you somebody that when somebody sends you something, you go off on them and you're immediately shooting the email back, or are you able to actually control those emotions, maybe draft that email, stick it in your drafts, wait an hour, come back, read it as if you're the receiver and say, maybe that's not the message I want to send, right? So your impulse control is one of those factors of resilience. Causal analysis, this ability to actually get to the root cause of the problem. Where are these feelings and emotions coming from? What is the root of this, and how then from that root can I understand what my best course of action is? Self-efficacy is this belief that I can handle any situation that's thrown my way, and that's kind of back to that little engine that could. I think I can, I think I can, I know I can. Realistic optimism, right? And this is an interesting one, because what we've found in the research and in the work that we've done around this is that generationally, there's different degrees of realistic optimism. The millennial population, what we're finding is that they have lower realistic optimism. They have a ton of optimism, but it's not necessarily realistic. And so the idea here is balancing realism with optimism. Empathy, which we believe is such an important characteristic of any successful leader today, and especially leading through the times that we're in, but really understanding the emotions of others. That idea of walking a mile in their shoes and really understanding where they're coming from. Reaching out is an important skill, and it's this idea of being able to say, I don't have all the answers, I need help from others, and really leveraging those relationships to help guide you through the hardship that you're facing. And all these 7 then come together to give you your average score, which is the resilience quotient. The way that this works is here on the right is an example of what that report looks like, right? So you have your profile. It'll show you for each of the 7 factors, emotional regulation, what your score is out of 100. So a 69, an 80 for impulse control. And those are averaged to give you your quotient here. The adaptive norm scores are based on, as I mentioned, I think it's about 35,000 people that have taken the tool. It obviously keeps going up as the data set improves, but it shows you how your score relates to the average. In terms of how we use the RFI, we use it as pre-work for the resilience workshops that we can do both online and in person. We use it as part of leadership development programs. There's an emerging leaders program that we use it in, and I'd mentioned that we also use it in LeaderSurf. I use it for executive coaching with many of my coaching clients, senior level leaders, giving them this insight into themselves and helping them in advance of a crisis to understand how they're going to manage through difficult times. And then the last really is that I've seen it used also from a career transition standpoint. So with unemployment hitting new highs this week, and with the expectation that layoffs are abound, the outplacement industry and helping people get back on their feet, this tool is something that you could take even on your own to get a sense as to how am I going to power through the situation at hand.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we've kind of reached the end. This was supposed to be just a little bit of a teaser in terms of getting you to think about resilience, about the fact that these are times where we all have to model resilience, both for our family members, for our work colleagues, and for ourselves. We'd love to do more with you around this. As we said, we have a 60-minute seminar that we can do as a webinar within an organization. We can utilize the RFI tool with you, or we can develop a customized program to meet your needs. So Adam, anything to add before we open up to questions?
No, I'm excited that we've got some time. Let's take some questions.
All right, so what am I going to do here? I'm going to figure out how I can unmute everyone.
Oh boy, the floodgates.
I think they can unmute themselves. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute your line and ask it. You could also do it in chat if you're more comfortable doing it that way. Don't all ask at once.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess maybe that's it.
Well, what we will do is if you go back to the site where you registered for this webinar, we will have a replay of this available that you could share with others on your team. We also have the other resources there. The soccer video that Adam talked about is there. There's also a TED Talk video with Charles Hunt on what trauma has taught me about resilience, which is a great watch. And then there's a podcast where I interviewed Charles to hear about his story to the TEDx stage and how he dealt with adversity throughout his life. So we're here for you guys. If you want help with your organization or would want us to do something similar, please let us know. But we appreciate you taking the time, and be safe out there. Thanks for attending.